Hello, thank you for joining me today on the Private Investigator Experience podcast. I'm your host, Phil Little. On this channel, we look at the cases in the life of a PI and also report on national and international violence that can affect us here at home. You might ask, how did a local PI get involved in international affairs? My investigative life soon led me, shortly after I became a PI, to the mysterious world of terrorism and intelligence in the Middle East. From this, I developed a worldview that has guided my investigative work. As the State Farm commercial, commercials work, likes to say, we've seen some things, we've learned some things, and we've done some things. And in my world travels, I have learned some things. Before I lay out today's case, I want to mention some things that are going on in this fast-paced international world. First, EU got a wake-up call when Vice President Vance spoke at the Munich Security Conference. He made it clear that the EU members were going to have to step up and take the lead in their own security. The US would help, but not be the money pot that it has been. This got their attention. They panicked. And some were even weeping on the stage that how bad the US was when we were talking about free speech. And they need to move back towards that. In fact, President Macron of France called an emergency meeting in Paris, and they arrived there yesterday. I think they're still there as I'm recording this, of the EU leaders to discuss what they need to do. Well, it's about time. I also might mention that it's happening right now, and last night and today, the peace agreement with Ukraine is in jeopardy due to Zelensky's double dealing, apparently. It appears like he's been behind the scenes trying to do a deal with Europe to station a couple 100,000 troops in Ukraine to give them access to rare, precious earths and leaving the U.S. out of it and not really dealing with stopping the war at this time. It appears like that could draw the EU into this conflict and maybe even the U.S. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all turns out. So keep your antennas up and your eyes open and your ears open. Then the second thing, this is one of the most common sense approaches to solving the Middle East problems of the war between Israel and the Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and others who want to destroy Israel and the Jewish people. I encourage everyone to go to Elica Le Bon, that's ELICA LEBON, 2 words there, her podcast, and listen to her as she lays out what could be the obvious solution. Elica is a daughter of Iran who is an Iranian-American attorney and an American and an influencer. As I listened to her solution, it was so apparent. I wonder why I didn't see this, or why did somebody smarter than me on the international stage see this? He grew up under the Islamic terror in Iran, and her pointed and passionate solution is as follows. And I'm just going to summarize this. You need to go listen to it yourself. She reminded us that after World War II, the UN was set up so there would not be another Holocaust. In dealing with the Nazi Party, members didn't try to appease, give them money, buy them off, be nice to them, and help them be nice to the world and get along. No, they didn't do that. They eliminated them completely. They cut out the cancer. Yes, there are pockets of Nazis today, no consequence, or do they have effect on world security? She says that the approach by the UN and the world to the radical Islamic terrorists who want to destroy Israel has been to give them vast amounts of money and allow them to um, idolize and pay the terrorists for killing Jews. Lisa says that the only way to have Middle East peace is to eliminate all the Islamic radicals and their organizations, just as we did with the Nazis, and not to appease them. Please listen to Elisa for the complete message. It's compelling. She mentioned also that Nuremberg trials exposed the world all of the evil that the Nazis has done. And it's time that the terrorists and their violent rampant evil is exposed to the world. So check it out. Let's get this information out and pose this as another solution that the world should be looking towards. Now, today's PI case. I've worked on hundreds of similar cases, and the conclusion to this one was not what we actually found. I learned again, you can't assume anything as an investigator. Well, let's call this case a mysterious intrusion. The case of the woman who thought someone was coming into her home. It started in a quiet suburban town of Eagle Rock, just on the northeast edge of Los Angeles. Mrs. Eleanor Roberts, assumed name here, a woman in her late 60s living alone, began noticing strange occurrences in her home. Little did she know that her occurrences would lead her to West Coast detectives to have a seasoned investigator try to find out what's going on. This document provides a comprehensive account of the mysterious case where Mrs. Roberts believed someone was in her home and moving things around in her absence. The background on this was Mrs. Roberts first became suspicious when she returned home one evening to find her living room slightly rearranged. The cushions on the couch, normally placed with meticulous precision, were askew. I happen to know some people that are like that everything it has to be in its place. And if it's a little bit off, they walk in the room, they know it. A framed photograph of her late husband had moved from the mantelpiece to a side table. At first, she dismissed these as anomalies, as lapses in her memory, or the result of her occasional absent-mindedness. However, the feeling of being watched and a growing sense of unease kept gnawing at her. Over the next weeks, Mrs. Roberts noticed other peculiar changes. Books were taken off shelves and misplaced. Kitchen items shifted. The scent of an unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air. Feeling increasingly unsettled, she decided to seek professional help. Mrs. Roberts contacted West Coast detectives and arranged for a meeting with me. And in our first meeting, she said she had chosen our agency because of the reputation we had for keen observation skills and methodical approach. She also said she had read some articles about me that called our agency the little FBI. When she entered my office, she looked like she had stepped out of an Agatha Christie novel. She was a bundle of 5 foot of energy with a flower hat and a colorful blouse and long skirt. She had a small purse clutched in her hands, and they were neatly folded in her lap, and she sat on the edge of her chair, leaning forward towards my desk. During our initial meeting, she detailed her experiences and expressed her fears. I listened intently, took notes, and assured her that we would get to the bottom of the mystery. I asked her how long had this activity been going on, and she replied for some months. She said she was embarrassed and hadn't told anyone, even her family, who she thought might think she was getting senile or her mind deteriorating, and they might want to put her in an old folks' home. She said I couldn't have that. As she told me the details and I listened, the details reminded me of many cases that we had worked which were so similar, and most of these cases turned out to be the person's imagination. As I talked to her and suspected this might be the case this time, I gently suggested to her that it might be just her forgetting where things were. She bristled up quickly and said, "Mr. Little, if you don't want to take my case, I will go to a detective who will." I smiled and reached out my hand and said, "Welcome as a client to West Coast Detectives." I arranged to go to her home, which was about 8 miles from our headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, the following morning. She had mentioned that she thought she might have someone following her, so when she left our headquarters, I sent an agent out to observe to see if they could pick up anyone that might be following her, and it turned out to be a negative. The next morning, in a quiet, peaceful suburb with rows of well-manicured lawns, my investigation began with a thorough inspection of Mrs. Roberts' home. I examined the locks, windows, possible other entry points for signs of tampering. Not to my surprise, there was no clear indications of a forced entry. This led me to ask Mrs. Roberts if there was a possibility of someone having a key or access code. She said that there was no one that she knew about. After spending a few hours checking the property and talking to her, getting her feelings on what was happening, I suspected at that point that this was just her imagination going on. I noticed the places where she showed me some things that were moved. I found that where they had been setting, there was dust around the edges, and when I picked them up, there was dust under them, which showed they hadn't been moved for a while. Well, my instincts told me I had a paranoid client, but I knew I needed facts to convince her that someone wasn't coming into her home when she was gone. A picture's worth 1,000 words. To get the facts that I could show Mrs. Roberts, I would need to install very discreet surveillance cameras in strategic locations around the house and on the front and rear entrances, and also place some motion sensors near the windows and doors to detect any of unauthorized movement. And we would be able to pick up any unusual activity without alerting the intruder. Over the next couple of days, I sent our camera installation team and went with them to guide them on where to place the devices. And we used small hidden type devices that were hidden so anyone coming in wouldn't even notice them or be alerted to the presence of their being watched. Over the next week, the surveillance footage didn't provide any visual insights. But into the second week, things begin to change. On several occasions, the camera captured a shadowy figure entering the house through the front door. The person was discreetly walking up to the door, looking around as if to see if anyone was out, but the neighborhood was so quiet, no one was around, and so the intruder wasn't even noticed. He was very meticulous, and it appeared he had particular interest in certain areas of the home. I analyzed the footage and noted the intruder's pattern. The individual appeared to have a routine, entering the house at a specific time and focusing on rearranging items without causing significant damage. The careful movements suggested a deliberate attempt to create a psychological unease rather than to steal or vandalize. Perhaps all of my years of experience with so many cases was going to render a new outcome on this one. It seems that Mrs. Roberts had not been wrong. Someone was trying to get her attention. But who and why? And was there any threat to Mrs. Roberts in this? With the evidence mounting, my next step was to identify the intruder. In looking at the footage and the days and times when the intruder had arrived, we did some profiling and determined that a possible day of the week that the person might be there and the time, which was going to be later in the afternoon. And Mrs. Roberts had a habit of about every afternoon of going out for a walk late in the afternoon. The sun would still be out, there'd still be some light, but sometimes it would be near dusk, so the light would be fading. I decided also to use a surveillance van, which had a vendor sign on the side, setting this right up the street from her, the next house up from hers, where we had a great view of the front, and anyone going into the back would not be suspicious. And this would be an obvious way to determine if the person got there that we could get inside quickly. I also had stationed another car up the street with another investigator in the event that we had an issue with the person on any takedown that we might be doing. Now, on that evening, we got out there. Mrs. Roberts, we watched her go out for her usual walk. We waited patiently in the van, and after about an hour, I saw this figure walking down the street, had a head down, and I really couldn't make out the person's face. He just casually was walking and then just kind of cut into her walkway. And he went to the door, and we had a key in his hand because he quickly put the key in and went inside and shut the door behind him. At this point, I told the agent with me, okay, let's go. I radioed the other agent to move in to be at the front of the house after we went in. And I was hoping he didn't lock the door behind him. And when we got to the door, he didn't. We opened it softly and we followed the intruder inside, carefully not to be detected. And there was a front entryway with a small room off to the right. And the living room was beyond that. So we had the ability to approach the living room, stay out of sight, and kind of peep around the doorway and to see what he was doing. When we saw the young man moving some things around, I called out to him and said, "What are you doing in Mrs. Roberts' home?" He spun around, looking surprised, and very quickly said, "I'm Mrs. Roberts' nephew, David." And I felt a sense of ease because I could sense that we weren't going to have any confrontation situation that we might need to use some kind of force. As we sat down, I asked him, why was he coming into the house when she was gone? He explained that he had fallen on hard times and feeling guilty about asking for help. He decided to try to get her attention. He had obtained a spare key, and he hoped that by subtly altering the house, Mrs. Roberts would feel compelled to talk to him. He was her kind of closest family contact. Thus open a line of communication where he would be able to share his situation. I suggested that we wait for Mrs. Roberts to come home so we could talk to her and explain what had been going on. When Mrs. Roberts arrived home, she was surprised to see me there with her nephew, and David expressed his remorse and explained the situation. Mrs. Roberts, relieved to have an answer to the disturbing occurrences, forgave her nephew. They agreed to establish clear boundaries and communication moving forward. A conclusion to this would be this case of Mrs. Roberts serves as a testament to the importance of trust, communication, and professional expertise. It needs to remember that every client case is different and not to assume the results before we do the investigation. And I learned in that this case wasn't like most of the others. This one had a real whodunit in it, and we were able to find out who it was and get it solved for the client's satisfaction. This case will be another one filed away as a job well done and the client happy and successful in the results. This case also highlights the role of a private investigator in uncovering the truth and restoring the peace of mind to those who are affected by mysterious and unsettling events. I encourage you, leave a comment on one of the platforms or on the YouTube channel. We appreciate getting your ideas, comments, suggestions. Maybe you have a case that happened in your life and you'd like to share that with us. Let me know. And then maybe it'd be one we could talk about on one of our shows, not using your name, of course, and illustrating how it happened. So remember, you can leave messages on any of the platforms or you can email me directly at pi777@gmail.com. Also, if you have a situation in your home, family, business, and you say, could a PI help me solve this and give me peace of mind by finding out what the truth is? Send me that information to pi777@gmail.com and I'll get back to you with the solution. Remember, be diligent in finding out what's going on in your community and around you so you can help keep your family safe and secure. Until next time, may God bless you, your family, and may God bless America.